call to order this workshop for the Siloam Springs Board of Directors, May 4th, 2021, for the utility rate study. And I believe that Steve is going to do the honors.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board. Steve Gorzak, Public Works Director. This evening, we have a gentleman from 1898 Company named Dave Nauman. Dave is going to be presenting this evening, and I don't want to steal his thunder because he's got a pretty neat setup over here, and he's going to introduce the rest of the team. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Am I okay with the mask off for President? Okay. You never know these days. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I'm here representing 1898 and Co., a part of Burns & McDonnell. And with me, I've got a couple of additional resources, depending on the questions we might get into tonight, that have specialties that go beyond mine. In fact, I'll go to the introductions. So as Steve mentioned, I'm Dave Nauman. I've been at Burns & McDonnell for about 30 years total experience. And I specialize in water and wastewater utility, financial planning, and rate studies. With me tonight is Adam Young. He's connected remotely through my laptop here. Can you hear us, Adam?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear him? Okay, great. Adam specializes in electric. He's got about 17 years experience in that area, municipal electric utilities, and Seth Cunningham is in Austin, Texas, and his specialty is solid waste sanitation utilities. And so together, the three of us are leading the study. I am the overall project manager, and we'll show you tonight some briefing materials for where we're at. So our agenda includes starting out with helping you understand where you're at with rates today. So when we compare you against some regional peers, we'll give you some context about where you stand with respect to the competitiveness of your current rates. And then we'll talk a little bit about the rate study process and where we're at. We're not done. We've reached a couple of good milestones, and that's what we'll be reporting on tonight. I want to go through some key assumptions involved in financial planning. Whenever we look out into the future, it involves some assumptions around future conditions, and so we'll share some of the more important ones with you, and then get to the punchline, which is what are the findings for each of your utilities. Then we'll come back to that regional rate comparison and make a forecast of what we think your rates will be in 5 years and how that might compare to the region as well. So I'd like to talk just a minute about what the city's objectives were at the start of the study. And it really is a revenue sufficiency question. Right now you have an automatic rate increase that's programmatically increased every year on the basis of the Consumer Price Index. The CPI is what drives your electric rates, and CPI plus 1% is what influences your water, wastewater, and sanitation rates. And the question really is that path sufficient to fund future operating and capital expense? We'll go through that by utility to take a look at what the specific requirements are for each of your enterprises, and then forecast that future revenue stream under that rate ordinance to get an idea of just how well it funds your future needs. And if it doesn't, what might change? What should we do differently to plug the gap? So you're going to see a couple of slides here with these regional rate comparisons. So I'll walk you through what you're seeing, and then we'll talk about what I see as the finding associated with that. What we have here first are your water and your sewer utilities, and we're comparing against Rogers and Springdale, Bentonville, Fayetteville. And we're comparing the bills for rates effective today for a 6,000 gallon a month user for a monthly bill calculation. And so for your water utility, which is on the left, you're in the green, that would indicate that you're among the highest of the five communities that we're peering. There's about a $30 a month average for that solution, or for that data set, and you're at a little over 35, I think about $37 a month. On the sewer utility, the average for this same population of utilities is about $44 a month, and your current rates would put you right about average. Then we'll look at electric and we'll look at sanitation. On the electric utilities, because of the differences in rate structures, what we're showing here rather than a monthly bill is it's an average cost per kilowatt hour. And that average across, it's really 6 data points, 2 for Fayetteville. But the same communities, electric on average is about 9.9 cents per kilowatt hour. So for Siloam Springs, you're just slightly above that average. I would characterize it as pretty close to average for this data set. What you'll notice is the ones to the left of Siloam Springs are investor-owned or cooperatives, and the public utilities, Siloam Springs and Bentonville, are on the higher end. And then for sanitation, again, same group of comparison cities, a mix of public and private providers here. The average is about $18 a month for a 96-gallon receptacle. And you can see, again, you're comparable to Fayetteville, but again, on the higher end. And so I would characterize your position right now is a little bit higher than average amongst these regional peers for water and for sanitation, and about average for electric and water. There's a lot of reasons why rates vary and bills vary among communities for these types of services. And it can be the age of the system, the amount of growth in the community, how capital's been funded in the past. There's a lot of variables, how they operate, and what the technology and assets are. So there's a lot of ways that they can be different, but I do think it provides you some context that's just good to know where you stand today. The rate study process is a 3-step process for us. This aligns with industry standards, and it's really the foundation for just about every rate study that we do. And that first step is financial planning. So we look out, in this case, 5 years through 2026, and we do a detailed forecast of your revenue stream to account for customers and growth and changes in use, and to produce revenue, what we think your revenue stream will look like for each utility. And then we compare that against the revenue requirements. And this is a cash-based based evaluation, so we're looking at operation and maintenance expense, your capital plan, transfers back to the city, all of those. We'll talk about them in a little more detail, but it's a very detailed assessment, and it helps us understand how well the revenues under the current rate path meet those future needs. Really an indication of what system-wide rate increases might need to be. The second step is cost of service. So that takes costs out of that financial plan, and using industry-specific techniques allocates them to customer classes. And that gives you some context about how rates should be designed. And that's really the last stage is rate design. So we look at cost of service as descriptive. It's context. It's not prescriptive. But it helps you understand who's driving your cost, and then that can influence how you ultimately design rates. Rates have to be designed to accomplish or produce the revenue that was indicated in that financial plan, and hopefully put you in a position of equity with respect to who's driving the cost. What we're here to talk about today is where we're at in that first step. And we've got some progress on cost of service. We're not quite ready to talk about that yet. But it is important to share with you where we think we're headed financially and get your feedback on that. I think it's helpful to talk a little bit about how financial policies are managed at the city, specifically for this enterprise, because that influences how we look at the plan. First of all, you have a combined enterprise. They have 4 distinct operations, and costs are tracked pretty well, but ultimately cash is all accumulated in a single account. It's a pooled cash management process. Sales tax funding is available to help. A good example of that is your recent wastewater treatment plant project. You also have some tax funding available for growth-related projects to a degree. But rates pay for, utility rates pay for renewal and replacement type projects, which you've, I think, typically considered depreciation capital and general capital. As a matter of policy, the utility tries to maintain about $1 million surplus a year. So as it collects revenue and pays its expenses, the desire is to help support a growing reserve. And as I mentioned earlier, you've got a rate ordinance that automatically implements a CPI-based adjustment every year, which we've reflected. When we talk about how do we look at revenue sufficiency, again, it starts with what are the costs, the cash costs we're trying to cover. So that would be your operation and maintenance expense. In the case of your electric utility, it's also purchase power. Your debt payments, most of your debt payments are retiring in the forecast period, so that's a good thing. Transfers to the city, and then the capital projects and reserve deposits that are funded out of the revenue stream. But there's some other guiding principles that we're looking for as we work through this assessment. And one is the idea that each utility ought to cover its own costs. So as best we can, we look at the cost specific to that utility, and the hope is, the desire is that we design a plan that helps get them to a self-sustaining position so that there isn't any cross-subsidization happening within those enterprises. We want to maintain prudent reserves, and so as a minimum operating balance, we want 90 days of O&M. What we're finding is that's really not a driver in this analysis, but that is an industry benchmark as a minimum of 90 days. And debt service coverage is also important. Debt service coverage looks at your revenues less O&M, and then what's left needs to be at least 1.1 times the debt payment due in that year. Your debt payments paid out of rates are relatively low, and they're retiring, and so that really isn't a driver for you either, but it is an industry standard we use and a guiding principle that we look at. And the last one I mentioned earlier is targeting an annual surplus of around $1 million a year as a total enterprise. And if there's a funding gap, what system-wide revenue increases might be needed to fund that difference. I mentioned key assumptions, and these are 4 important ones. One is we're assuming we know you're a growing enterprise, and we're assuming 2 to 3% a year growth in residential accounts. And so you'll see kind of an upward trend in revenue forecasting that's associated with the growth. Consumer price index we're assuming is about 1.5%. By historical standards, that's a little bit low. 2% is probably closer to normal, but we've been in a pretty extended period of relatively low general inflation. We'll see where that goes over the next couple of years. Utility inflation, so the cost of your operation and maintenance expense and your capital projects, we're assuming is 2 to 3% a year. And then the last thing is how much capital are we trying to fund? And those capital plans for general and renewal and replacement projects have been developed by the city, looking out 5 years into the future. So let's talk about what we're seeing. And there's a little bit of an eye chart on the right. I apologize for that, but I'll walk you through what it's showing. The top of that table shows what we would estimate the CPI-based increases to be. So this would be what you would be doing if you continued kind of business as usual. And with an assumption that CPI continues to be 1.5%, you'd be looking at a 1.5% increase for electric per year. Water, sanitation, and wastewater would be the CPI plus 1, so 2.5%. What we're seeing is that we don't recommend implementing CPI-based increases. We think something less than that is adequate for electric, water, and wastewater. And the middle of that chart shows the adjustment that we're making to that CPI increase to get to an effective increase at the bottom of the chart. So what we're suggesting for electric is that, and water as well, is that a 0.75% per year increase is sufficient to meet the funding needs that we see for those 2 utilities. Wastewater is at 2% per year. Sanitation is the exception. We're seeing it's a little weaker cash flow. We'll talk about that in a moment. And an increase of 4% per year, so higher than CPI, is recommended for that enterprise. But what we expect, because we know general utility rates for water and sewer are increasing about 5% a year nationally, sanitation rates are going up about equivalent to CPI, electric rates similar to maybe 1.5%. But with this program of increases, we think your competitive position will actually improve over the course of 5 years because we expect other utilities to be doing something more. So now we'll look at each of these utilities in a little deeper detail, and let me get you grounded on what you're looking at. The same format is shown for all 4 utilities, so once you kind of get the hang of what you're looking at here, it'll apply to the other 3. The bars represent the cash-funded requirements. And so for your water utility, it's your operation and maintenance expense in blue. The brownish red is transfers to the city. The yellow is the capital improvement plan. You see a little bit of fluctuation in that over the course of 5 years. Debt payments are in green, and so as you can see for your water utility, the last payment to be made out of rates for water utility debt happens in 2022. And then the gray represents reserve deposits. So this is that contribution back to the enterprise balance to help produce about $1 million a year surplus. The lines represent different forecasts of revenue. And so the black line, solid line, is revenue under existing rates with no CPI increase. So this is rates as of 2021. You'll see it does increase a little bit. That's related to growth. But the line is below the bars, which indicates that it's not sufficient to meet those requirements. The dotted line represents a CPI-based adjustment, and as you can see, it's much higher than the cash-related requirements here. That's why we're not recommending a 2.5% CPI-based increase for the water utility. The blue line represents what we're recommending, which for the water utility is the 0.75% a year. And some of the highlights from our cash flow analysis indicate the water utility is pretty strong cash flow-wise. It covers its costs reasonably well. It helps that the debt payments that are on the books for water retire in 2022. We're funding about $300,000 to $700,000 a year in capital improvements for your water utility. Again, that's your general improvements and renewal and replacement. And we can meet those needs with something less than CPI. It's a 0.75% increase as opposed to the CPI policy that you've been following. For wastewater, again, similar format, same components, O&M, transfers, capital, and debt. What I'll comment about on debt is your debt stream for your wastewater utility. It runs out a little longer, but it also retires in 2025. So by 26, you're debt-free on the sewer enterprise. What you'll notice is that reserve deposit bar is a lot smaller. And when you compare the forecast of revenue under existing rates to these bars, you can see that there's a bigger gap. The sewer utilities cash flow is a little weaker, and that's why we're recommending, as opposed to water, which we're suggesting 0.75, we're at 2% a year for your sewer utility because of that. The capital needs on the sewer utility also are a little bit higher. We'll talk about that here. So weaker initial cash flow, but with the program of increases, you will be self-sufficient in that sewer enterprise by 2025, and then thereafter. Rate-funded debt retires in 25, so again, that helps. But we're funding about $700,000 to $900,000 a year in capital for the sewer utility. Again, general improvements and renewal and replacement of existing infrastructure. And 2% a year is sufficient to meet those criteria. Similar format for electric, except we have one additional component in the cash-funded requirements, and that's purchase power. As you can see in the bars, the gray, which is purchase power, is the largest element of your cost in the electric utility. But again, similar approach. Electric is fairly healthy as well. It's fairly strong cash flow. And so we can meet the future needs of operation and maintenance and capital and transfers to the city and deposits to reserves with something much lower than CPI at 0.75% per year. You don't have any outstanding debt on your electric utility today, so that does help with the cash flow. We're funding about $1.3 million in rate-funded improvements, again, general improvements and renewal and replacement. And we're also assuming, to the extent that there are any significant movements in purchase power costs, that's addressed through the power cost adjustment mechanism that you currently have in place. The last one is sanitation, and again, similar buildup with revenue requirements, including O&M, transfers, capital, and debt. Very small amount of debt outstanding for the sanitation utility, and it's retired by the end of 2022. But the gap here between revenue under existing rates and these revenue requirements is fairly large. It's why we have a higher rate increase recommendation for sanitation. And it's above, you can see the blue line in this case trending above the CPI based adjustment. That's because it's a 4% rather than 2.5% per year. And we get to self-sufficient for your sanitation utility by 2026. So you can see because that revenue under proposed rates, the blue line still resides below the bars. We have a ramped recovery of that cash flow, and it will be self-sufficient by 2026, but we're phasing that in. And as I mentioned, weaker initial cash flow, but achieving self-sufficiency. Cash funding of capital is $400,000 to $700,000 a year for the sanitation utility. And the other comment to make, and this is helps influence maybe some good perspective on the bill comparison. The level of service varies quite a bit in solid waste, sanitation, and there are some areas where you're doing a little bit more than some of your peers, and so that also kind of factors into how we think about the rate position for that utility. And then we'll look at what we think this implies for competitiveness of future rates. So let me get you oriented to what you're seeing here. Most of the data here is what we looked at initially with the comparison to regional bills. In this case, it's the water utility. And what you see in the first 5 bars here are what we presented previously. That's the bill under existing rates. What we do with the dotted line, and I'm forgetting about this handy little pen. So the dotted line here and the dotted bar here are our estimates of future. And so if we assume you increase your rates across the board at 0.75%, so all your rate elements go up at the same percentage, much like you're administering your CPI increase today, that future bill rises in 2026 to almost $40 a month, right about $39. And with a 5% per year national increase in water and sewer rates, we expect the average for your peer communities to also be increasing. So what we're suggesting is that after a 5-year period, your water bill is going to look a little more like average and a little less like the high one among the regional peers. There's a lot of assumptions that go into that, but that national average that we're talking about is very much real. We've got a lot of data that backs that up. And what each individual utility might do remains to be seen. But we do expect that it's not a static situation and that those utilities will be raising rates as well. And with a 0.75% increase, we expect you'll improve in your competitiveness over time for water. On sewer, again, you're kind of middle of the pack right now on the regional comparison. And you can see in the middle here, this again is what we think 2026 looks like, assuming a 2% per year increase across the board. So all your rates rising at the same percentage for sewer. And what you'll see compared to where you're at today, very much in line with average, we expect you to be substantially less than average, again, assuming that nationwide increase of about 5% a year on sewer rates. On electric rates, there's not a lot of differentiation. What you'll see in the current position right here is that when we look at the current average of about 10 cents per kilowatt hour, you're a little bit higher than that. Over time, we expect that relationship will narrow a little bit, but again, pretty much average, we think, on the electric utility. And the last one is sanitation. And so this one, we're seeing a little more movement, right? We've got a 4% a year increase that's proposed. We believe that industry average is closer to 2.2%. And so you do see a little more movement higher in this instance. But it's important to note that this is, of the 4 utilities, this is the lowest average bill. And so that 4% on a relatively small dollar amount doesn't move the total bill that much. And we'll take a look at that here in just a few minutes. So I know that's a lot of information, so let me just recap what we're recommending based on our review of the cash flows to date. So for your water and your electric and your wastewater utilities, we think an increase less than CPI is sufficient to fund future needs. For water and sewer, that's for water and electric, excuse me, that's 0.75%. For sewer, it's 2%. Sanitation, we see a higher need, and so that one's recommended at 4%. All the increases except sanitation are lower than that CPI adjustment would otherwise implement. And we think your competitiveness will improve as you implement those relatively low increases over time for electric, water, and wastewater. For all utilities, the programmatic increases we're proposing are sufficient to meet your future needs. Well, let's talk a little bit about what we see at the total ratepayer impact. So in the first column there, for each utility is what the monthly bill is on average. You can see it's electric is the highest of the 4, total bill of about $196 a month. In 2022, if you were to implement a CPI-based increase, so what your ordinance would direct you to, overall, the bill would go up about 2% in total. So from $196 to about $200 a month, an increase of about $4. With the recommendations we're making in the study, because we're going below CPI for water and electric and wastewater, what you're seeing in the last 2 columns here is an increase, effective increase of about 1.4%. So lower than you otherwise would be following your ordinance as it currently exists. The total bill would be about $198 on average, and an increase of about $2.72 over current. Over the course of 5 years, that gap will widen because we'll start compounding those increases. And you know, what's a difference right now of about $1.24 between those 2 paths, the CPI versus the proposed 2022, becomes about $6 a month. So it becomes a little more meaningful the deeper into the plan you go. So I mentioned we're not done. We have cost of service to complete and rate design to present, and we expect, I think, to be back in June to have a discussion with you about those recommendations. But a lot of it is driven, it's heavily influenced by what we're planning, right? That financial plan, that first step. And so your feedback today, any questions I can help you with, that's our goal, is to address any questions you may have, and to the extent that you have feedback that influences the plans, we'll take that and work it in as we work through the remaining stages of the study. I mentioned I think we'll be back in June, and then we'll follow that up with a report that documents for each utility what the assumptions are, the methodology, and the recommendations. And what I would say for rate studies, and I perhaps should have led off with this, is we look at these as a roadmap, really. It's where we think we're going over the next 5 years. But because we're making assumptions about future conditions, and this is a dynamic time as it relates to inflation and what's going on with your consumers, and a lot of things can change. And so what you may find over the course of time is you got to recalibrate that plan a little bit. But it helps to know where we think we're headed. And that's the purpose of the study, is to help create that path and then help you implement appropriate rates. And with that, I'd be happy to address any questions you might have.
Dave, directors, comments, questions?
I have a comment. Go ahead, David. Thank you. I appreciate this information, and I was one of them that was a little leery of even doing the rate study because of the idea that people had that rate studies typically mean increases in utility rates. So this is very encouraging. And I appreciate the way you've laid it out in a way that it's very understandable, especially when you say that the 4% increase, while it's a higher increase, it's an increase on a smaller amount of money. So ultimately, it's still a lower increase on the overall bill. And I think it's just important that we get that message out there so that people don't focus on the 4%, but, you know, similar to what you've done here, encourage people that this is really a good thing. So I appreciate the information.
David?
Yeah, I've got a question. I was surprised that you only included these 4 other cities and didn't include Bella Vista, which is more a city that is closer to our size, would be much more similar to compare us to them than some of these other cities along the corridor. Was there any thought to that?
We'd be happy to add it. It wasn't intentionally excluded. We worked with the team to define the communities, and it's easy for us to add another one and include it in the presentation.
Was there any thought to looking at other cities around the state or region instead of just, I mean, these are the easy cities to pick up. Why would you not do a different comparison besides these 4? I mean, these are fine. But in terms of population, I think Bella Vista and there's probably other cities in the state that are more like our size.
So size is one element. I think being kind of in that corridor, there's a certain level of growth that happens there that's not happening elsewhere, and I think that influences how we think about comparables. We certainly could draw a wider data set for this. And we'd be happy to look at that, but Bella Vista would, yeah, that would be fine. We do work in Fort Smith. I can tell you their dynamics there are different. They're not growing, and they're wrestling with a consent decree, and so their sewer utility. Hold on just a minute. Their sewer utility implications are much different than yours. So there is power in looking at data, but it's hard to understand. When you start peeling back the onion, what makes each one different? But it is good to know where you stand. And so if you've got requests for specific cities you'd like to include, we'd be happy to add them. And Adam, were you going to say something?
Yeah, we did for Bella Vista on the electric utility side. If I'm not mistaken, I believe they're partially served by Carroll Electric, which I think we do have on the benchmark.
Okay.
Carroll Electric Cooperatives, they would have been slightly below the average. I'm looking at the rates, just slightly below, maybe like 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And I think they may also be served by either SWEPCO, the investor-owned utility. I'm looking it up now, but I believe they're on the electric side. They're split.
Okay.
Them and Rogers were split. But like Dave said, we can add them into it, or at least call that out. But I do know on the electric side they are partially served by Carroll Electric, which is on the slide deck.
Well, even though we are in a growth area for decades, being on the western side of Benton County, we have tended to be a less cost of living city than the ones along the corridor until the last 7 or 8 years when rates have gone up to match these other cities or go higher than these other cities when we don't have the growth that they do along the corridor. What are these other cities planning on their utility rate increases?
Yeah, so we don't know that, and we can see what's publicly released, but we don't know for municipals unless they've adopted a multi-year rate increase.
Well, that's what I'm curious.
Right.
You were recommending that we have a multi-rate increase or multi-year. So I'm curious if these cities have that same type of.
They may have looked at this type of analysis, but we don't see that in the public record. So what we look at is what has been adopted. And in like in your ordinance, for instance, you have rates identified for, I think, 2015, 16, and 17 specifically. So you adopted a multi-year rate increase and then implemented the CPI basis after that. We would look at their code and see how many years they've adopted. And if they've adopted into the future, we can reflect that. But because we don't know if they've done anything beyond that, that's a question we can't answer.
Do you not go interview them or ask them what their plan is?
No, not typically. That's why we do use that national average for that reason. We can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks a water and sewer index as a part of inflation, and we can see it back to the mid-'80s. It's increasing about 5% a year. We also have the benefit of AWWA, American Waterworks Association, that every 2 years publishes a very broad survey of water and sewer rates, and they will show you 5 to 6% a year, more like 5 for water and 6 for sewer. So there's pretty good data to obtain what's happening nationally. It gets getting specific utility plans is a much heavier lift.
You're able to give us some information on what these other cities have been doing in their past rate increases, it would be helpful.
I'll make a note of that.
Dave, can I point something out too?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to point out on the electric side, which is a fairly substantial portion of the costs, we've actually seen, it's a very dynamic environment, as you know. I'm sure you've probably heard about the Texas electric power crisis, drove up energy prices. But for a long time, we've seen some decreases in that. But you can get steady historical information off EIA, which we can pull. It's just partly where we got our data from. The power markets are highly susceptible to power cost fluctuations as a result of GRDA power cost. So we made a high level of, utilities are all different, I guess is what I'm saying, based on their power supply mix. It's hard to say that SWEPCO or Bentonville would do anything that's fixed because they're, again, subject to their wholesale power supply contracts, which can be very dynamic at times. Did that come through okay, Dave?
Yeah, I think we can hear you just fine.
Yes, Marla?
Would we not receive some other useful information if we looked at service provider to service provider, as in where we buy our electric and the cost that we pay for it and what is available around us that other cities are using? Because we're not taking into consideration what they're paying for their utility.
For their power?
Right, their utility.
Yeah, the average that you see for electric at 9.9 cents, I think that's an all-in. Correct me if I've got that off, Adam, but I think that's an all-in number. Am I correct on that, Adam?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. I'm a water and wastewater guy. I got to check with my energy folks. But I think what Adam's speaking to is that can change pretty dramatically depending on what happens with power supply costs, and that was pretty disruptive over the winter storm here in February.
Madam Mayor. So I'm not familiar with rate studies. But I have participated in salary studies, and in my mind, the mindset I have, salary rates, whatever, that's very sensitive to our citizens, whether it be a citizen, an employer, or whoever. Whenever we did a salary study, we didn't compare locally because we compared to similar cities that offered similar utilities. So some of the utilities that you offered here, that you have in here, comparatively, like these sanitation, what we do for sanitation is different from what other people do for sanitation.
Right.
So in my mindset, I would think it would be a similar city, the similar size, similar growth, with similar utilities. Even if you have to split those utilities, like this city does electric and we're going to compare it, this city does sanitation and compare it similar to ours. Am I wrong in that mindset? I mean, would that not make more sense than just locally? Because even locally, the cost of living in Fayetteville is not comparative to the cost of living in Siloam Springs.
Yeah, and I think, yes, ideally we would find perfect comparables, but the reality is that perfect comparables don't really exist. You can find a match in some respects, and then you tend to sacrifice it in others.
Right.
And so by taking that regional snapshot, And what we find, at least for water and sewer, is that the region is pretty influential, that the cost of that service varies widely across the country. And so there's value in looking at what happens around you. But having said that, if there are specific utilities that you have in mind that you think would add value to the comparables here, we certainly could pull that information and add it.
I don't know cities. I was just thinking, we never did ours just locally because of the fact that, and it is, you know, you have different variables that play into it. You know, you have your benefits and cost of living and everything else.
Right.
I think it would be the same or similar to do a rate study, because it's a very sensitive subject in our community, especially
Understand.
after we've had our solar in the last year. So I was just asking.
Is this just residential, or does this include commercial and industrial rates, or is it?
Your rates are for all customers.
Okay,
What we're featuring here is residential as the primary comparison.
okay.
What we usually will do in rate studies, especially if we're talking about rate structure change. So in the case of your water utility, you've got a declining block. The more you use, the cheaper the unit price. And that is, it's a type of structure that is it's a dying breed, if you will. It's not perhaps as modern as a lot of other communities are doing. But when you start talking about changes in structure, you can create movement in bills. And so one of the things we'll look at is different profiles across your constituents, so commercial, industrial, and get an idea of, with the proposed rates that we develop, what the change in their bill will be relative to this average.
Right, because I would imagine if you are looking to bring in industry or commercial, you want to still remain competitive with the area that we're in.
The challenge we find for industrial, for instance, is that the methodology used to recover costs can vary widely. The comparisons are fairly straightforward on a residential bill, but there can be a lot of ancillary charges that come along with industrial service that are harder to compare. And so the confidence in those comparisons sometimes can be difficult to nail down, which is why we generally stick to residential. But we will show if there are any changes to the larger users as a result of anything coming out of the study. We'll help demonstrate that.
I do appreciate the way you have it laid out. It makes it very easy to understand. Some of it was a little bit of a surprise to me, in a good way. So I appreciate having the opportunity to look at this. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What else?
I just add one thing that I think the whole concept of this is obviously, it is a response to members of the community that are concerned, and they should be, but we're being proactive. It stimulates good conversation in the board, and I'm sure when you come back in June, we'll have more questions on that. But at the end of the day, these are our realities, and the burden, if we call it a burden, but you know, as board members, you know, this is what we have to understand. This is kind of the meat of the job, and there's going to be some folks that no matter what we produce here, you know, we're not going to get all smiles from everybody, but it is really just reality of life and cost of living. And people on fixed income, it's difficult in this community, and specifically from our ward, you know, I've got a large percentage that are on fixed income. And so I appreciate the conversation, and I look forward to your next data.
Madam Mayor,
Reed, would you like?
I just want to say thank you, Dave.
My pleasure.
I just have a question that is a follow-up to Directors Allen and Rissler on the comparison to other cities that are more our size and the reasoning for that, I guess. So I don't know if that's something that you all need to answer, or if that's something, because in my mind, I'm thinking if we are at the same rate or higher than the corridor, then we would potentially be significantly higher than other places across the state that are our size, but that may not be
It really depends on the dynamics affecting those utilities.
So,
But we can cast a wider net
okay.
around how we're looking
I
at
was
that.
just curious as to the reasoning behind that.
I guess to answer your question, I wanted a more apple comparison.
Yeah.
Bentonville Sanitation does not offer what our sanitation is. Their prices are gonna be really low. And when our citizens see that, and then they see our prices are really high, if we're not explaining this to the citizens, you know what I'm saying? They need to understand why there's a difference and
Okay.
what we're offering compared to other cities and what our utilities are giving for their cost.
And the only thing I would add to that is that sometimes knowing the why there's difference isn't clear. In the case that you're citing, when there's a clear difference in the type of service that's provided, and solid waste does vary quite a bit, that's easier to communicate than if we're talking about wastewater service, which is really a single price and it's different.
Right.
And that's where you get into age of system and how they've funded things in the past and where they're at with renewal and replacement and those types of dynamics.
Right, but we're combining them. We're not selling them to them individually. We're combining it as one utility bill.
Right. But we want each of those utilities to cover their costs, which ultimately is what drives the rates.
Philip, did you have something that you would like to comment?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to, David, if you would talk for a minute. I want to come back about the rate comparisons, but talk for a minute about the state law that requires a utility water rate study once every 5 years. I believe that's a new law in the state. I don't know if it was adopted this year or in the last legislative session, but one of the questions that we discussed with Dave and his group is, if the board were to adopt these proposed rate increases for the next 5 years, what happens then? Do we fall back to the existing rate structure that we have today? And as we
Have
were
that explained. Can we have that existing rate structure explained? 'Cause
well,
I think a lot of people don't understand. It's just an automatic.
the rate increases that are automatic today were adopted, I believe, in 2013. And so in the electric, it is what CPI is. And that's averaging 1.5%. So every year, the electric rate automatically goes up by whatever the CPI was. And on average, at least since 2013, I guess, that's been 1.5% per year. On the water, wastewater, and sanitation, it is CPI plus 1%. So if the average on CPI has been 1.5 plus 1%, that's the 2.5% a year, every year since 2013. So we were having a discussion that if the board were to adopt these specific increases for the next 5 years, well, what happens at year 6? Do we continue with those increases? Do we fall back to the current increase? And then we said, oh, wait a minute, there's a state law that says every 5 years now we have to do a rate study for water. And I believe in this last legislative session, there was a similar bill for wastewater. So should you adopt these rate increases, beginning, here's 2021, so in 2025, 2026, we would have to be doing another rate study for at least 2 utilities. And it would be my opinion at that point that we would do a rate study across the board and be prepared for, the 6th year under this plan, what those rates should be, because we've got to study at least 2 of those utilities. So I just kind of want to make you think about that, because at some point during our discussion, we were all going, well, what happens after 5 years? And it appears, based on these state laws, we're going to have to study, before the end of the 5-year period, we're going to have to study at least 2 of the utilities. And if you're going to do 2, you might as well do all 4 utilities. As it relates to rate comparisons, what I believe we heard from the board when we brought the contract for rate studies was we wanted a comparison of where we stood in Northwest Arkansas in our region. So as Dave said, I think it's easy for this group to go back and look at other cities. Bella Vista is in the region, obviously. We internally, Christina and I, compare our sales tax to cities that we think we're more comparable with. Van Buren, same size, maybe doesn't have the electricity side of it, but sales tax-wise, population, Searcy, Mountain Home, we kind of compare ourselves to those. So we can have a conversation with Dave's group and look at what other cities. It's going to be hard to find a city that's a direct apples-to-apples comparison, but you know, a city like Searcy, like Cabot, from a sales tax, they both have a university. But we'll see what we can do and broaden that, and I appreciate, Dave, you saying that. But the focus originally was, what we heard was the board wanted to see how we compared in our region, and we're always comparing ourselves to the top four. So that's the reason why those were the key cities. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Philip.
One comment about the frequency of rate studies. Setting aside the Arkansas legislation, we would consider it just a matter of good practice to look at this about every 5 years, because conditions change. And I know in the case of I believe some of your sales tax might sunset in 2026 or 7. So that would be something to pick up in a future study as well, because that might cease to be a source of funding for you. But the 5-year interval is really what we would recommend.
Madam Mayor,
Thank you.
I've got another question.
Real quick, David.
What did you mean when you said that we are like a dying breed on the water usage, where they pay less the more they use?
A declining block water rate structure and sewer rate structure, for that matter, is not as frequently used in the industry anymore, and that's partly influenced by the availability of water. It's partly influenced by peaking, and it's partly influenced by an interest in conservation that kind of pervades a lot of our conversations. It permeates a lot of our conversations about rates. And there's a school of thought that says that the more you use and the cheaper it gets, that doesn't promote wise use of the resource. Where you really see that in the Midwest, I think you'll still see declining blocks in some circumstances, but even with a lot of our Midwestern clients, they're moving away from that into different forms of rate structures. So that's what I was trying to get to. There's nothing wrong with sustaining that, and that may ultimately be what you choose to do.
We're a little different. We had, for decades, we had 2 food businesses that use a lot of water.
Right.
So
and they
not
put
every city has that.
That's right, and they put less peaking demand on your system. So that's the reason those rates are cheaper for those types of users, is because they don't drive costs the same way that a household would. But there are ways to get to that with different pricing signals and structures, and that's what I was trying to get to.
Will you include industrial as an option comparison?
With the regional comparisons?
I see Philip nodding his head.
You say yes.
In the next workshop, when we start talking about rate structures, industry would be included in that overall adjustment to that block rate structure. Yes, that was what I was shaking my head to.
I didn't know if what he was doing a rate study, he had said to Carol that it was only residential. I didn't know if there was a way for us to see what industrial rates comparative to other cities would be as well.
We can do that.
That would help as well, if we could see that.
Thank you, David.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here. Philip, you have any other comments?
No, thank you.
Then I will call this workshop adjourned. We will convene. Call to order this regular scheduled meeting of the Siloam Springs Board of Directors for May 4th, 2021. Roll call.
Sappington,
Here.
Smiley,
Here.
Burns,
Here.
Hunt,
Here.
Rissler,
Here.
Allen,
Here.
Carroll.
Here.
All will please stand with me. At this time, Director Burns will lead us in prayer, and please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
God, tonight I pray for the health and safety of our community as we continue to transition and loosen the COVID guidelines. I'm thankful and grateful for the freedom that is provided to us. And in your name we pray, amen.
At this time, I will ask for anyone that has an electronic device to silence that, please. Thank you. Next is our public input time. At this time, the public may address the Board of Directors regarding any item on the consent agenda or any item, any business not listed on the board's regular agenda. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to the board at this time? Please come forward and state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes at the podium. Thank you.
My name is Deanna Inklin. My address is 5000 Thomas Street, number B. I have lived in Siloam since 2017. From a very young age, I was brought up going to church to learn about Jesus. In college, I began to understand the relationship aspect of being a believer in Jesus. He wants a relationship with each of us, and he left heaven, lived a sinless life, and died for us. He died in our place. Have any of you ever done one thing wrong? A little white lie or a little juicy tidbit of gossip which stole someone's reputation? I have. That one sin means I have broken the whole law and will face judgment. The wages of sin is death. As a result of one sin, I should get eternal death, but the gift of God is eternal life. As I submit to him, believing in Jesus, I receive forgiveness instead of death. But I have been saved because I have been saved by Jesus and he lives in me. I have the power to live this life according to his plans and purposes. I am responsible on earth to accomplish these plans through his strength. Each one of you has been given a set of talents to use for his glory. We will give an account to him when we die, determining if we've accomplished what he wanted. You will give an account for the decisions you make on this board, the opportunities you've been given to make Siloam Springs a city that glorifies him and shows his righteousness. You have been placed on this board, not because of anything you have done, but because God has a plan for you and wants to use you for his righteousness and use you to better the lives of those you have sworn to serve. You are not here for your own fame or power, but for his glory. And I pray that each of you walk in the fear of the Lord. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13 and 14. The end of the matter is this, and all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment on every secret thing, whether good or evil. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to speak to these appointed servants. I pray you would bless each one with a greater knowledge of your love for them, of your desire for each of them to follow you with their whole heart. You desire all men to come to the knowledge of the truth, and I pray you would open their eyes and ears to you. Guide each person as they make decisions, both here and in their personal lives. I pray they each hear your voice of guidance saying, this is the way, walk in it. I pray each person searches for your will to be done in their lives and in our city. I pray they each put aside their own agenda and walk in your agenda for Siloam. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Deanna. Is there anyone else? If not, we will continue. Next is our consent agenda. Item A, regular meeting minutes from April 20, 2021. Item B, dedication of utility easements 415 East University Street. C, dedication of utility easements 3550 Highway 412 East. Item D, Resolution 1321, Significant Development Permit, Beehive Enterprises LLC, 22000 Highway 16, Timberline Business Park. E, Resolution 1421, Preliminary Plat Development Permit, Fox Meadow Edition, 600 to 700 block of East Lake Francis Drive. Item F, Resolution 1521, 2021 Budget Amendment, Administration, Chamber of Commerce 2020 Economic Development Agreement for $7,500. Item G, Resolution 1621, Street and Alleyway Closures, Rainwater Wedding and Summer Concert Series. Item H, Contract with Public Works Department, West Siloam Springs Water Services Renewal. And before I ask the directors if there is anything they would like to have pulled, I would ask that we pull item D. And directors, is there any comments or questions that you have for these items?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I just had a point of clarification based on the administrator's report that he's going to share with us later. Do we need to have G on the consent agenda tonight? Okay.
Mayor,
Yes, Brad.
request we pull item F.
Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I was going to request E and F.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda with items D, E, and F removed?
So moved.
Have a second. Second, sorry. We have a motion. Marla,
I made the motion. I moved the motion.
Indy. Lisa. Roll call.
Wiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Allen, Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington.
Yes.
Thank you. So at this time, I would ask that Ben, if you would come forward to discuss Resolution 1321, item D, that I requested we pull.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the board. I'm Ben Rhodes, Senior Planner. Due to late design changes needed to the drainage pond and ditch, the applicant is requesting that this permit be remanded back to the Planning Commission on June 8th, 2021, so that the commission may be able to provide a renewed recommendation on the permit based off of these required changes. Staff is in support of this request to remand the application, and we are available for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments from the board concerning this request to remand to P&Z?
Or, Madam Mayor,
Yes, Carol.
do we need a motion
Yes,
for
we will.
that? I move that we, on Resolution 1321, we remand back to the Planning Commission.
Do I have a second?
Second.
And Lisa. Roll call.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Allen, Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. The next item that we have is Director Burns and Director Sappington both requested F, and Marla, you also wanted E.
Yes.
So I will start with you, Brad. Your comments on F, item F, which is the resolution 1521.
I don't really have any comments. I don't want to harp on it because I think I did a fair job of beating up the chamber at the last meeting and not in a personal way. But we as a board sit here and we've requested, and rightfully so, because our constituents asked us to get quarterly reports and to make people accountable that we have these contracts with. And so, you gotta love the chamber because we had an epic dogwood festival. And, from a political standpoint, bringing that to us, when you bring joy to the world, it's tough. It's a tough one. But I think once we set this precedence, we have to remember if people we have contract with fall short, then we have a moment of grace, and we have to look back at this time. And if this time never happens again or happens again next year, I'll hold them accountable. My stand will be my stand, but we just have to keep that in mind. I call them paper tigers when we put stuff on paper and we don't follow through with it. I like accountability, and I don't think the fault lied upon our staff. And so I think that's my point this evening is I don't think city staff fell short. I think when you change leadership, things get lost in the way, and people have to be accountable, and I know it will pass tonight, and I'm sure Marla and I will be a continuing no vote. And so that is all I have to say. Thank you.
Marla?
Thank you. I wanted to go ahead and say what my feelings were. I didn't know that we needed to when I said no the other night, and so I just want to express my concerns and share them so they'll be a matter of record. I feel that this situation should fall on the chamber and not the city. I don't think that the city did the shortcomings. And yes, we had a contract, but the budget or the books are closed for last year. There was training for staff who was responsible for submitting these timely before the responsible employee left the chamber. I was able to verify that that did take place. The Chamber of Commerce has had a large turnover of staff since the new president and CEO took position, and the responsibility belongs to the CEO to make sure that business continues as should be expected in a timely manner, no matter whose responsibility is. The final responsibility is the person in charge, and I don't feel that the city needs to go and open up last year's books to cover up for that expense.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, David.
I think you could ask just about anybody in the know around Siloam that they would know I have not been a supporter of the Chamber of Commerce receiving taxpayer dollars in the past. I even stood at this podium 4 or 5 years ago and stated that the Chamber is a member-driven organization that is financially built upon its members' donations. But I was raised that right is right and wrong is wrong, and what occurred here was a simple mistake. I have a hard time believing that our city staff would not have seen the last payment hanging out, knowing that it had not been paid, and think, well, the chamber doesn't want that money, do they? Let's just not pay it. I think that this fell upon the chamber. I think it fell upon the city. For anyone to say, well, this never happened with Wayne Mays, I think it's a ridiculous comment. This was a situation of someone else leaving the employment of the chamber that was responsible for this. and I think it's kind of petty for us to argue over it. I think it's money that was developed or decided by this board and the chamber board to fund a specific concern. And I don't believe that anyone would wish any other organization, say the consultant that spoke tonight, if we didn't get their final invoice, would anyone on this board say, oh, we don't owe them. We don't owe them the last $25,000 or whatever. I think this is a situation where it was an accident, and I think it needs to be rectified. I would like to see any organization, whether it be Boys and Girls Club or the museum or anyone else that has a contract with the city, I would like to see all of these contracts conform to the same time frame. I think that they should all be under the same obligations and rules, whether it goes that they all invoice the city or all of them not invoice the city. I think if it's in a contract that it's decided that we're going to pay the chamber quarterly, you put a little automatic generation of a check every quarter in the city finance department, and it's generated. To require any organization to send an invoice, I think, is just utterly beyond. We don't require the museum to do that. For my answer when I had the question of the Boys and Girls Club, why we were approving that in March, the answer was because that's when their contract is dated. Why can't that be dated the same calendar year that the museum and chamber and everybody else? They should all be decided at the end of the year during the budgeting process so that we have conformity. I just believe you have it either one way for everybody or you have it the other way for everybody. And to pick and choose certain ones that you want different, it's just kind of ridiculous. It's my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Carol.
I do believe that it was a simple oversight. It was part of that $7,500 was set aside in our 2020 budget. So there's still $7,500 in that budget. I know that that's been closed. So it's not costing us anything more than what we would have expensed. So I do believe that we should, on a one-time basis, pay this $7,500. But I do think that I tend to disagree about just generating a $7,500 check on a quarterly basis without an invoice of what they've done. But I do agree that we should pay it.
Yes, Mindy.
In follow-up to what Director Allen said about having all of these contracts sort of on the same schedule, I could see some benefit to that. My understanding is that the invoice accompanies the quarterly report, and that's one of the reasons why we expect the invoices, because the payment is kind of contingent upon the quarterly report and showing that they are meeting the obligations of the contract. But if there was some way to keep all of those on a similar cycle, that could be beneficial. As one who has received grace, I appreciate that and want to be able to extend grace. As one who has received grace because of mistakes that I've made, I tend to learn from my mistakes, and so I think this is probably a learning process. I agree that we need to pay that money, and like Director Smiley said, it was budgeted in the 2020 budget. What I would like to see, though, is in the memo from staff or in the resolution that I think accompanied the memo, there be some note to the effect that we didn't pay $30,000 last year and then $37,500 this year, that it's still the same amount we're paying out, but just so that it doesn't look like all of a sudden we bumped it up to $7,500 this year. So I don't know if there's a way to do that, but that might be helpful just for the records.
Thank you. Yes, Carol.
I just, I just believe you have it either one way for everybody, or you have it the other way for everybody. And to pick and choose certain ones that you want different,
That was confusing to me in the memo under the fiscal impact. The budget amendment will increase the original amount budgeted from the chamber contract from 30,000 to 37.5. Does that mean the current contract with the chamber is 30,000? Or last year's contract was 30? I got really confused with that.
No, sir,
Philip.
all that means is that, the budgeted amount will go from 30 to 37.5. The contract with the chamber for 2021 is $30,000 as it was for 2020. So as I think Director Smiley mentioned, there was only $22,500 paid to the chamber last year under a $30,000 contract. We can't pay out of 2020 books because they've been closed. So assuming this board approves the resolution, it will increase the budget from fund balance by $7,500, but the contract with the chamber for 2021 will remain at $30,000. They would just be paid what they didn't be paid last year.
Thank you, Philip. Is there any other questions? Not, do I have a motion to approve Resolution 1521 for the budget amendment for the chamber?
So moved.
Second.
Got it?
I think.
Roll call.
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Tappington,
No.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns.
No.
Resolution is approved. The next item is item E, Resolution 1421, the preliminary plat for East Lake Francis Drive. Marla?
I just wanted to bring up some comments that I received from some of the residents in that area. Their concern, of course, is for the multiple amount of duplexes that will be put on the property. They are concerned that the backs of the houses are going to be facing Lake Francis, where there are no other backs of houses facing Lake Francis, and there will not be any fences for privacy on the back of those. They were also concerned about off-street parking and how that would become affected with the multiple number of them being on a cul-de-sac. And also they wanted to know about the structure of the duplexes in comparison to the others that are on Lake Francis. Those that are already there are all brick, and there was concern of if they would also be of brick or if they were going to be, siding or other materials. So I told the ones that I had been reached out to, and told them I would bring this up, but they really needed to get it in writing and be here themselves. The one lady that I talked to, she was also at the planning and zoning, and she felt somewhat uncomfortable with not that she wasn't understood as well as she thought she should have been. And I told her just to keep speaking about what her concerns are and to get us a letter, and the letter I could forward to the city administrator, and he would share with the rest of the board.
Thank you, Marla. Ben, would you like to address some of that?
Sure. Ben Rhodes, Senior Planner. Some of those questions I wasn't aware of, so I'll just do my best off the top of my head. I did look into the density question. How does this development really compare to others in the neighborhood? So we're talking about 22 dwelling units. I will note that previously there was a approved development there called Golden Eagle Estates that was for 16 lots, and that would have accounted for 32 dwelling units. So this is a considerably less dense than the original development from 2004. When you factor in the detention basin and the street and everything, you're getting about 5.5 units per acre. If you look at the two-family development that's on Christie Lane, which is just to the west, that's 6.92. And if you look at the three two-family dwellings that are on the southernmost part of South Washington Street, right before you get to Lake Francis, that's 6.38. So this is the least dense of all the three developments in the area. I don't have any information about what they're going to look like. I do know there's going to be a fence installed at the back end of the cul-de-sac that will prevent cars from shining their lights directly into the backs of the existing duplexes on Washington Street. Like I said, I don't have any information about what they're going to look like, whether they'll be brick or clapboard. And the backs will be to Lake Francis, and that's really can't be helped because with the cul-de-sac, they have to front into the cul-de-sac. And so if they were fronting out the other direction, we would have issues with the driveways coming out on Lake Francis being really close together, and that could cause some traffic issues there on Lake Francis. That's the best I can answer right now. I'd be happy to defer to other staff if there's further clarification.
That's fine. I just wanted to get these comments out because that's what was given to me, and I wanted to make sure that we had your input and they could have that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, David.
I've got a question for you, Ben. I actually am appreciative that on this page you have it marked that we are moving from R2 to R3, and then on the far right side R4 where the apartment buildings are, which as it should be. The buffer between R2 and R4 should be R3, so I appreciate you doing that. I had a question on the overhead picture. There, just to the left, is a small strip of R3. That's not built on, right? That is unbuilt, right?
Well, yes, the three on the map there, if you look on page 2 of the staff report, you see the R3 that's to the left, right up South Washington Street. I believe that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
That's the, and I can bring it up on the overhead as well, but that is the 3 units at the back of South Washington Street.
Picture, I couldn't tell if that was the street, but are those duplexes there?
Yes, sir, they're duplexes, yeah.
The other question I had was on the street impact fee of $90,970. It says half street impact fee. You're saying that they either pay that or they put the necessary city required, what, building the street? Or
the half street improvement, yes. So that would be the estimated cost to put the curb and gutter on their half of the street as it fronts on Lake Francis Drive. So they could either do that construction, or they would pay the fee to the city, and we would do that as part of the.
What do you mean their half of the street? You mean where the street comes into Lake Francis?
No, Lake Francis itself. So if you divide Lake Francis in 2 parts, a southern part and a northern part, it would be the part that's on the northern side that's fronting along the front southern edge of the development on Lake Francis. So it's an improvement to Lake Francis Drive.
But they have the choice. It said, shall pay a half street improvement and sidewalk fee of $90,000 or construct said improvements to city standards. What is the said improvements you're talking about?
That would be the half street improvement. So it would be putting in curb. See, there's no curb or gutter on Lake Francis or anything like that. So they would be literally reconstructing half of that side of Lake Francis Drive because it's abutting up to their development.
Just what's in front of their development?
Correct.
Okay. I've seen street impact fees, but I've never seen half street impact fees.
It's a little bit different, yeah. It's not the typical street impact fee. You're correct, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ben, real quick, would there be a way for them to be required to put privacy fencing across the back of those lots? That would be the back of the houses. I know that's a concern to some of them as, you know, how they're going to be kept.
If it was the pleasure of the board, that could be a condition added onto the approval. But it's not a code requirement. The only thing we were concerned as a staff was at the very end of the cul-de-sac, because you have the cars driving around that corner and shining lights right into the backs of those 3 duplexes.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Brad.
You know, that is not my ward, but I would encourage you once again, and city administrator will enjoy this next comment, so buckle up. He says, don't shake your head, Philip, it's gonna be all right. And I understand, I'm gonna go back to East Central, and I know it's pre-platted, but I'm glad to see that we're curbing and guttering. But if you wanna see what happens when we don't make this happen, I'll show you a little section of the neighborhood that's tucked away and hidden that is becoming quite the eyesore, and we're going to have to absorb that correction as a city cost. And I know I asked for a workshop before, and I will say once again, I hear Director Sappington loud and clear. This cookie cutter expansion with rooftop economics, when you travel throughout the corridor, as we just had a workshop on rate study, I see multiple duplexes with a very homey feel, with the porches out front and parking to the rear. And I would just encourage us as we continue to grow and develop, and I'm quite aware of what's going to come in front of the board, particularly in Ward 2 off Sherry Whitlock expansion, looking out to the future, possibly this year, is that that is a sounding concern from citizens. A sounding concern from citizen. Director Sappington is saying again, and why would new development be concerned of how they're going to look? That is concerning. What is the reflection of Siloam? What do we want our growth and development? If we're concerned about utility rate studies and expansion and passing that burden on to fixed income folks, I don't want to pass what we're building on to the next generation. And I think as a city, if we request some things and it costs just a little bit more, or it requires these contractors because they have a cookie cut design that they make a living off of, I don't want to take their living. Change your cookie cutter design, do your cost analysis, and let's set this city on a proper growth. And this is just going to be another example. I can already tell you what that looks like. And I know there's families that need housing. I don't want to deny it. And I know the industry needs that housing. And it is a tough decision and road we have to go on. But what are we passing to the next generation? And I think as we say yes to this, that question's out there. And we're just going to have to start sounding off loud and clear. And I guarantee it, those developers will still come here. Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Norma.
Going back to what Ben said about the board would need to ask about that for a fence, my concern is the back of the duplexes and Lake Francis, and it is busy. But if children are playing in the backyard and, or they're going to ride their bike off the curb and go to the park, there's a lot of children in that area, and I just think that we need to protect them as much as we can. And if there's not a barrier or an enclosed yard, that if it's not something we require, then the people that live in the duplexes will tend to put up what they want to keep their dog in or keep their kids in. And I think if we start out with a standard and make sure that standard's met when it's built. So I wish to see that included.
Marla, are you asking for a fence just on the street side or on the other side as well?
Well, the other side is pasture. Yeah. So, I mean, there's livestock in it. And I don't see them getting rid of their livestock anytime soon or changing what they do there, because they're, I don't know how to call them, but they're collectibles. They're not the kind you butcher to eat. They're miniature Herefords, and they're worth a lot of money. They're large pets. So, I mean, we are requiring fences around of a lot of the developments. Why is this one not?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Director Sappington, I can't answer why this one's not, but I can answer that in other areas when there are differences in the intensity or the compatibility of uses, like industrial to commercial, or better yet, commercial to residential, there's typically a requirement for fencing. But as Ben Rhodes indicated, in this particular case, you could move to, if you choose as a board, you could move to approve this subject to an additional requirement for a 6-foot wooden privacy fence along Lake Francis Drive. And that would be a requirement for the preliminary plat, and we would probably allow that to be built, and then as those houses build, require that fence to be installed, you know, as the houses are built, or you could require it to be built with the subdivision for that matter. I would also like, if I could, to ask City Engineer Justin Bland to step up and talk for a minute about the master street plan as it relates to the street fee versus the street improvements, the half-street improvements. And Justin, my question is the master street plan very clear that the developer has the right to choose to either pay the fee or make the street improvements, or is that sort of a decision that we work with the developer on, trying to figure out as we get further into the plans which one is in the best interest of the city?
So on the half street improvements, so that city staff can basically make a recommendation either way, and kind of working with the developer here, he kind of expressed interest in both options. So we're kind of leaving it out there either way. I think we can accomplish both, especially considering you know, the idea is to have that as a project next year for the city to do.
So I think in Director Burns's comments about another duplex development where the lots were already platted, and I believe there was maybe a slight lot line adjustment, we had discussions that maybe in hindsight we should have required the street improvements, the half-street improvements then. I think we probably had the right to do. It hasn't been done in the past. So I think listening to Justin from the city standpoint and staff standpoint, getting the preliminary plat, we'll work with the developer to try to figure out what's in the best interest of the city to either require the half-street improvements or to have them pay the fee in lieu, because that is a plan in the near future to do that. Sometimes half-street improvements kind of create this oddball thing, because you're driving down a very narrow road, and then for a very short, in this case, short distance, street gets wider, and then there's curb and gutter, and then the street comes back. And you'll see that a great example of that is, and for the life of me, I don't know the name of the road, but it's in Tawnytown. If you turn there in Tawnytown like you're going, I shouldn't say this because I drive by the winery, I don't go to the winery, but drive by the winery, and then that large subdivision over there on the north side, street gets wider, it's curb and gutter, and then it comes back.
112. Is it
But I just wanted to point that out, that the idea is to work with staff to figure that one out. But Director Sappington, back to the fence, I think it's a simple motion if that's your desire to approve it, subject to the developer installing a fence either at the time of final plat or as houses build on those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lots that back up to, or that are adjacent to rather, Lake Francis Drive.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
What is Kenwood, Lake Francis scheduled in that area to be widened?
Yes.
And when is that?
Justin?
I mean, I don't want him to do, this developer to do something and then we have to go back and,
Sure. So that's one of the board goals is to have a design in place this year, and then basically to budget for it for 2022 for construction. And we think with basically the timelines being so similar, if they do elect to build it, we can basically make the designs match up. So if there's going to be a greater time period between the two, I'd be more concerned about that. But I think we can make them basically be the same design. He would just build part of his.
there is an advantage to us with the street fee or in lieu doing the work by the developer.
Are you asking if there's an advantage to us either way? I mean, I think he could go either way. I don't see it as a big issue for us to build around or to match up with what they build, because we'll be involved in the process. But obviously, if it was going to be our crews going out there and doing it, and we had the funding to put towards that project, that would be helpful as well.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Lisa.
On the half-street fees, does that include sidewalks and side paths? And how do you decide which one?
So yes, that does include the side. I think it is the sidewalk in that area, and we consult the master sidewalk plan that the board has previously approved just to see what's on there. I think there is actually scheduled to be a side path on that side, but in the master sidewalk plan it says that if I remember this correctly, that in residential development that they're only responsible for the sidewalk, and that the city would upgrade it to a 10-foot width, and not to put that full 10 foot onto residential developers, because it's actually the home builders that would build these sections and not the developer itself. But it would be included in that fee, though.
Yes, Mindy.
In regard to the fence, I do understand the desire for one. I think if we were to require something like that, we would almost want to require something that would go all the way along the south side and then all the way along the west side as well, because as it looks now, it's just a little section behind the cul-de-sac, not all the way to the street. With that said, we have some rentals ourselves. None of them have privacy fences in the backyard. We have had people choose not to rent our duplexes from us simply because they don't have fences and they have children and dogs, and they want something in their backyard. So I think probably if people had children or pets, they would probably choose not to rent these duplexes. When I think of a wood fence, I think of how good it looks the first few years, and then it starts looking pretty dilapidated after 8 or 10 years. I would almost rather see some sort of trees along there that could sort of hide the backs of those yards. Just a thought.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Devin.
You can see the picture the overhead picture in our packet. Across the street, the yards of the single-family homes do have wooden fences, and I think Mindy's idea of doing it on the west side and along the south side is a great idea. It is already got a natural barrier on the north side, but I think we have far too many situations where children can run right out in the street, even though we may have a sidewalk they're supposed to stop at. If there's not a fence for a duplex, we should consider that. The other thing I had a question was, Philip, on this Lake Francis Drive, we just redid part of the street, right? The east end, was that it?
Correct, east of the railroad tracks.
East of the railroad track, okay. Did we do curb and gutter on that? Okay.
The next section roughly is from Washington to the railroad tracks.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Carol.
I move that we approve resolution number 14-21, authorizing a preliminary plat development permit for 600 to 700 block of East Lake Francis Drive, subject to the recommended conditions of approval. And I would like to put in there that we are requiring a 6-foot fence along Lake Francis Drive and on the west side. And I don't know how to put that together, but that's what I want.
That's fine. I think that shows our intent and what we are requesting, so I think that is fine. Philip, is that good enough for staff and for the developer, the way she has stated that?
I believe it is, and I would just like to say for staff that being that this is a condition of the preliminary plat, it would be part of the requirements for the final plat, not part of the individual builders.
Yes.
Do I have a second? We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Chrysler,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Thank you, Board. We'll move on now to the regularly scheduled items, contracts and approvals. Contract, Public Works Department, Water Division for pipeline and wire crossing, Kansas City Southern Railroad. Steve?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the board. Steve Gorzak, Public Works Director. This evening for your consideration and approval is a pipeline and wire crossing with Kansas City Southern Railroad, and this contract is related to the water plant improvement project, but more specifically the raw water pipeline that will go from the river to the treatment plant. As you probably recall, we already have one line there now, but we want to put in a redundant one. But in order to put in this redundant pipeline, we have to cross the Kansas City Southern Railroad tracks. So we need to go under the tracks to do this, hence the need for a contract. I wanted to point out in the in the staff report, I have 3 bullet points that kind of highlight the contract, and one is that Kansas City Southern requires an authorized construction observer to be on site during the bore. Now, I guess I should back up and tell you the way we'll do this is the pipeline contractor will hire, or already has a sub hired to bore a hole under the tracks, but it has to be 10 feet below the roadbed or 16 feet below the bottom or the top of the rail. So it's going to be a deep hole. So there'll be a construction observer that will be there witnessing that to make sure that that's all done correctly. There'll also be a flagman that will have to be present, and it'll be, I liken it to having a flagman when you see a road construction project and you got somebody stand out there with the flags or the stop sign usually. But this person is primarily there to make sure that the construction workers don't get too close to the tracks. They have to be at least 25 feet away. That way, we don't have an accident. Both of these, the construction observer and the flagman, are under contract with Kansas City Southern. It's an engineering group called Bartlett and West, and they are the authorized contractor, but contractor, and they are the ones that will be providing the flagman and the construction observer. The fee that's associated with that will be paid by the pipeline contractor. And speaking of fee, there's a one-time permit fee of $7,500 that must be paid. The fee is related to the complexity of the crossing. I visited, I've been visiting with the contractor or the group that's under contract with Kansas City Southern that issues these contracts or permits. It's a company called Jones Lang LaSalle out of Fort Worth, and we've been in discussion for 6 months about this whole thing. But the one thing was the one-time permit fee. I tried to use the example of the Sherry Whitlock overpass project where we had to relocate a water line, and in doing so had to bore under the tracks, and there was a permit fee in that, but it was explained to me that the reason there was a difference between these fees was because this one's going to involve a lot more than the last one. The overpass project, we bored a hole, put a casing in, put the 12-inch water line, but we also did away with the at-grade crossing, so there was no more railroad crossing on Sherry Whitlock, and we also filled basically put what's called flowable fill. It's just real thin concrete in the hole where the former pipeline was. So they gave us credit for that. This, we have a 42-inch casing that's going to go into the railroad tracks, and inside that will be a 24-inch pipeline plus a 4-inch electric conduit plus two 2-inch electric conduits for fiber optic. One will have fiber optic cable, and the other one will have just be a spare for future use. So because of that complexity, that had driven the cost of this permit up to $29,000, but under negotiations we were able to get this cost down to $7,500. The city attorney had reviewed this contract more than once, but finally got through it, and he's good with it, and I am too, and I ask that you approve this contract so that we can get on with this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to make a comment on this proposed contract? If not, board, questions, comments for Steve? I will make this comment that in some of the meetings that we have had recently, both Philip and I, with the other mayors and the cities around us, they have a very difficult time getting anything done whenever it comes to the Kansas City Southern Railroad. So the fact that we were able to reduce that fee by that much, and that they are even working with us and allowing this to happen, we are very, very fortunate. So thank you, Steve, for your job, for your work on that. Job well done.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you, Steve. I don't like paying extra money, but I do move that we approve the pipeline and wire crossing contract with the Kansas City Southern Railroad.
Thank you. Second. We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Allen,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next item is the budget amendment and contract, the Community Development Hyco Street Side Path, $715,262.81 as a budget amendment, $708,181 contract with 81 Construction Company. Justin?
Thank you, Justin Bland, City Engineer. So this is a Hyco trail project, our side path project, and you guys haven't seen this in quite some time, so I'd kind of just give a quick review of what the project entails to start off. So on the exhibit, this is the same one that's in the packet, but at the top of the screen it's Sherry Whitlock, and then on the bottom side there's Sager Creek. So this is going to put a 10-foot side path along the east side of Hyco Street, basically from Dollar General down to Sager Creek Drive. And during that section, we're going to slightly widen the road, the east side of the road, put a curb and gutter, and then the 10-foot side path would be directly behind the curb and gutter. And then once we get past Sager Creek Drive, we're going to veer off the road and across the Simmons property. They were very generous to dedicate access easements across their property and put a pedestrian bridge across Sager Creek and then tie it to the existing trail system. And then for the duration of this project, since we're basically building it in the existing ditch line of Hyco Street, we'll be putting storm pipe underneath the trail that will take care of that water, so won't cause any issues with it. And just kind of a general history of this. We originally applied for the TAP grant in 2018, and there are different pots of money for the TAP grant. So the regional planning award is $250,000, and RDOT award is $155,000. So the total grant amount is $405,000. And this was approved by the board in March of 2019. And I recreated a timeline here, but got a bunch of dates. But basically, we turned in the preliminary plan set in May of 2019, and it took until late February of this year before we got authorization to bid. During that process, we got all the environmental clearance, the right-of-way. We met with all the property owners along the project and got all any necessary easements that we needed. So we bid the project out, and we received 4 bids. Our updated cost estimate at that, when we bid it out, was $793,000 approximately, and the low bid came in at $708,181. So we think it's a good bid. 81 Construction has done a couple of side path projects for us before and have done good work, so we were happy with that result. So then, in addition to the low bid of $708,181, RDOT charges a 1% admin fee on top of that, just for basically doing the paperwork. So when you add this to this $7,081.81 to the low bid amount, the total amount that we would be responsible for is $715,262.81. So that would be the total amount of the budget amendment request. If you take away the $405,000 grant, that leaves $310,262.81 that the city would be responsible for, and this would come from the street funds reserve account. So with that being said, staff recommends approval of the budget amendment and awarding the contract to 81 Construction, and is available for any questions.
Thank you, Justin. Is there anyone in the audience that has a comment or question on this item? There being none, board, comments or questions? There being none, I'm sorry, David?
I wasn't on the board when this was voted on or approved for the grant, but it is quite shocking to me that our part has tripled from $102,000 to $310,000, and we blame RDOT, and the review process caused us to not get this in 2019. I don't get it. I don't understand it. If $400,000 was granted, at the time it was going to be 80% of the budget, but it's no longer 80% of the budget. This is a sidewalk, basically, 10-foot sidewalk. And I can tell you from citizens, tax-paying citizens of this community that talk to me, they are not in favor of our city making budget changes of $750,000 for sidewalks. Yes, we all want sidewalks. Yes, we need sidewalks. We've been saying it forever. They get put off, they get put off, they get put off, and then we have one here. And, you know, we just had a long discussion over a budget change of $7,500. And everybody's ready to rubber stamp $700,000 to our budget. I just think it's inexcusable to expect the taxpayer to keep funding mistakes, and I cannot support this.
Anyone else?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Brad.
I make a motion to approve the budget amendment in the amount of $715,262.81 for the Hyco Street Side Path contract with 81 Construction Company in the amount of $708,181.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Carroll.
Yes.
Sappington.
Yes.
Smiley.
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Hunt.
Yes.
Whistler.
Yes.
Allen.
No.
Motion is approved. Next item on our agenda is ordinance 21-06. This will be the third reading. Annexation of 25.57 acres at the 23,006 Lawless Road. And Ben, I guess Ben Roadshow again, right?
Yes, I guess so. Yes, ma'am. So this, Madam Mayor, this is the third reading and final reading for the annexation of 23006 Lawless Road. This is the annex in 25.57 acres and is zoned as R3. We have not received any additional comments since the last reading, and we stand ready for any of your questions. Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience that has comments or question about ordinance 21-06? If not, directors? There being none, do I have a motion to approve ordinance, or to place ordinance 21-06 on its third reading, suspending the rules and reading title only?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Chrysler,
Yes.
Allen,
No.
Roll call.
Carroll,
Yes.
Philip.
Ordinance number 2106, an ordinance accepting the annexation of certain territory described as the Lawless Ranch Addition, phases 2 through 5, to the city of Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and assigning the same to a ward.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adopt ordinance 21-06?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to adopt. Roll call.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Chrysler,
Yes.
Allen,
No.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Ordinance 21-06 is adopted. Next item is ordinance 21-07. Excuse me. First reading, amending section 102-21 of the City Municipal Code, rezoning from C2 and R2 to R4, 800 to 900 block of South Washington. Ben?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the board. Let me just take a few minutes just to get this loaded up on the computer here. There we go, we got it up there. Thank you. So yes, thank you again, Madam Mayor, members of the board. For your last ordinance, you're considering a rezoning request to rezone the property at the 800-900 block of South Washington Street from C2 and R2 to R4 multifamily. It should be noted that this was the same property that the board reviewed last June. At that time, the request was to rezone the C2 portion of the property to R2. Ultimately, that request was withdrawn by the applicant after not receiving staff or planning commission support for the request. So the future land use map intends this area as future industrial, as denoted in the purple shading. The land use class was chosen here due to the proximity to the industrial properties to the northeast of the site, as well as access to the Kansas City Southern Rail Line. The request to rezone the property to R4 does technically conflict with the guidance of this map. Here you see a potential development plan for the property that was provided by the applicant. The request before you is to rezone this property, not to approve this development plan. However, the plan does provide insights on the applicant's motivations for the R4 zoning. The plan appears to be 9 two-family dwellings on a single lot, and this would require a rezone to R4, as this is not as this is on one lot. So with more than 2 dwellings on a lot or parcel, that R4 zone would be required. Staff has not endorsed this plan as meeting city code, and it should be, and should the rezoning be approved, it will likely be that this plan would have to change to be addressed technical comments. So this didn't go through a technical review. It's just an example of what they could potentially put on the property. Finally, it should be emphasized that the developer in no way is tied to the specific concept plan. Should the rezoning rights be granted, he could come back with a multifamily apartment complex and be within his rights to construct it, pending that meeting the R4's bulk and area standards. Here you see the site. Unlike with the rezoning request from last year, the current proposal includes the wooded area to the north of the shown drainage channel, so it's a little bit bigger area than before. So as you're probably aware from reading the staff memo, staff does have some concerns with the rezoning requests that are carried over from our review from the R2 rezoning request back in 2020. And I'll just cover some of those concerns real quick with you. So first, the proposed zoning does invite development that would be out of character with the neighborhood. The proposed residences are shown to be in the potential development plan are approximately 63% smaller than the residences in the neighborhood. We can see that from the photo that most of the dwellings in the area are larger and are on deep lots, with the housing that's pushed closer to Washington Street. The proposed rezoning encourages infill construction that would break the prevailing land use pattern in the area by allowing development to be aligned not to South Washington Street, which would be considered out of character for that neighborhood. It also, due to the requested density, encourages houses to be built closer to incompatible land uses, such as the because it would be built further back, it'd be built closer to the car dealer, as I'm showing that there, or the car auto shop there. Third, staff believes that the density does not fit with the South Washington Street neighborhood. The closest multifamily to this area is located off of Lake Francis Drive in a totally different neighborhood context. There is no R4 in the area, therefore this might be considered spot zoning, which is novel zoning placed on a site without any like zoning in the area. This slide shows the site what it would appear like after a 2-inch rain. This picture was taken just a little bit more than a year ago. I think it was mid-April in 2020 after one of the rain events that we had at that time. But we did want to take advantage of the most recent rain event from last week. So we had, I received some photos that show just what the water situation is out here. So this is Kenwood Street looking over to the east. So the property in question is actually back behind the photographer, but this is just showing how the water would flow from the fields to the south into this property. And then this is looking right across the street. You can see this is the subject property with the water flow going in along this channel into the property. And then finally, it's snaking all the way back here towards Washington Street, which Washington Street would be back behind you. This is again looking to the east. So because of these factors, the drainage, the land use, and all the other issues, we just don't feel comfortable with the R4 zoning. So we're requesting to deny, and the Planning Commission also recommending denial. With that, we're available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address Ordinance 21-07? State your name and address, please.
Ron Holmeyer, 701 South Mount Olive. Not sure if that's picking me up or not. maybe you can understand me a little better if I take this off. All right, we're back again. We're trying to get some answers as to what would be acceptable in this neighborhood. Staff keeps putting together the context that, this is future land use, is industrial, and they actually say they support that recommendation. But I don't know, that's not really something Mr. Chavez would like to do, and so we've been trying to find something other than what you would expect or think you would need to do if you do like all of this reporting and commenting and picture taking is, I mean, they keep turning their back literally to Kenwood Street and what's south of it and only want to reference what is north of this site as to what we should comply with, even though you've already got half of this property is currently zoned for commercial. Right behind it, between us and the railroad tracks, is commercial activity. And personally, I think it's better if you're going to put residential next to commercial rather than commercial next to residential, because at least when someone occupies a residential that is next to an existing commercial, they know what they're getting. Whereas if they're in a residential and you add commercial later, then they didn't have a choice in the matter. The comment about size of houses, I didn't realize our code was starting to dictate the size of residences that one could build on a lot. I didn't know that the minimum setbacks were now going to be the setback and not just a minimum that if you want to set your house back further than your neighbor, you're not going to be allowed to. And really, we just need some direction. I mean, got virtually no input from Planning Commission other than they followed staff recommendation and voted no against it, but I just have to assume that they were agreeing with what staff had in their memos. None of them stated why they were voting to recommend denial. And so we're still a bit lost as to what would be acceptable on this property. And, if we just need to leave it commercial, then I guess I'll shut up and we'll figure out something to do along that lines. Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience? Directors? Yes, Lisa.
I have two questions, and I don't know if this is Ron or Ben, but one of you. The first one is, I've been around the city with Philip, and we have a drainage issue in our city. I know we had a lot of rainfall, the last rain, and we were not the only city that was affected with that amount of rainfall. But when you go to a neighborhood and there's houses under that people have water gushing in their house, it's an issue. So my question is, if you have it as industrial or if you have it as residential, and I know it has to do with the amount of green space or however you do it, but we keep hearing about the flooding issues. If they put a commercial building there, a pretty large commercial building, or if they put residential housing, how is it going to be less affected because you put a commercial building there and not a residential?
Justin Bland, city engineer. I mean, as far as the runoff, you're correct that residential is going to have less impact. Now, R4 though could approximate industrial though, because I mean, they have the site plan, but our concern is that if it's rezoned and that doesn't happen, then you have apartments and you have parking. I mean, you could end up with something similar to industrial. I think R2 would be much less of an impact for sure than industrial or commercial for that matter.
Okay. And on the R2, you said something about the size of the houses. So that will drive the market value of the property around them if they're 67%, is that what you said, 63% smaller?
It potentially could, and just to be clear, it's not a code to say that you can't build houses of different size. We're talking about neighborhood context, which is in the code under Chapter 54 is one of the criteria. So that was the reasoning why that comment was made about the house size.
So have you guys made any recommendations of, I mean, you're just saying maybe put an R2 in there, or you're not even giving any kind of guidance?
We did provide guidance to the applicant a couple weeks ago after the Planning Commission meeting. We had a meeting with them and made a suggestion to do housing that would be, if I could go back, housing that would be fronted along Washington Street with potentially driveways that would be shared driveways. A good example would be out on what you see on South Holly by the middle school there. It's not the middle school now. I guess it's the intermediate school. But in any case, right there, we have the houses that are all lined up with the driveways that pair out like a wishbone. That would be probably appropriate here because it would match the housing that you see along both sides here very evenly. And then because these have the long lots, and that's the same pattern going all the way through. So we would just think that that was the suggestion that staff made to the applicant as an option.
And Ron, what did Mr. Chavez didn't like?
Ron Holmeyer again. Couple of things. The yield obviously is way lower. If you tried, there's a way you could possibly, the residential that's north of the wood line there, the line of trees there is, in the historic district, you could have as small as a 40-foot lot, but with a modern home, you have a 2-car garage, then that would mean the whole front of the house would be garage. And all you'd see is a little door off to the side of it, which doesn't thrill him. And I wouldn't think it should thrill anybody really, but maybe there's somebody that likes that look. I don't know. The most we could get would be 6 lots, I think, if we were allowed to continue that small width lot on the current commercial zone property. But then you're looking at having to figure out some way to get across that ditch at 3 different locations, and the cost of that really takes the fun out of it, in his opinion. So
I feel bad for him to have this piece of property and trying to figure out what to do, how to develop it. But I do see some of the issues that we have as far as drainage in our community.
I'm really kind of surprised that we're back talking about this because it almost looks like to me it's a non-buildable piece of land. But I understand that he's invested in this. He wants to get his money back. And the more houses he builds, the more he's going to recoup. But there is a lot of water that comes through there. I was there probably when Ben was taking those pictures. Was it last Tuesday or last Wednesday? There was, and I have pictures on my phone. It was almost underwater. It's almost like it's part of the drainage channel that goes across the street. What can we do to alleviate this problem? Is there anything we can do?
Madam Mayor? Well, Director Smiley, if we remember the last time we hashed this one out, and I appreciate Ron for being a faithful and diligent person for this contractor, and as much as I'd like to see development and infill in the historical district, we approved off Kenwood what I would consider, and Amy was here on the board at that time, some hard surface that we debated with the city engineer on, that it's going to increase that flow, and I still believe to this day, if you look at the green space and where the drainage ditch goes, we need to sit down and we need to acquire that property as part of our flood control channel. If you look at the house adjacent across the street, Steve's house, who we all, back in the day, remember Steve used to be a police officer, and we increased that pond over the years. I was a city employee when we made that we made it what it is today. But at the end of the day, I'm about to attend a webinar Thursday afternoon, and it's just time to be accountable for it. The question is, there's going to be obviously a cost, and I hope if we go that route or consider it, that we don't let greed get involved and we think of the safety, because that all ends up somewhere, and that ends up right down here at another economic development issue that we're going to have to tackle. And we say 100-year and 500-year flood. This is where that stuff starts, and over the past 5 and 8 years, 8 years specifically, we have seen an increase in water flow, and at some point we have to be accountable for it, and I think this is that site. Thank you.
I agree with Director Burns.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Marla.
I also agree that this is a non-buildable lot. If you look, that is more than a drainage ditch. It's a stream in formation. And it's not going to do anything but get bigger and bigger. And if we were to allow something to be built on this and stop the natural flow of the water, we're going to create problems all around it. And I agree, it's something that the city needs to seek in acquiring as to help Mr. Chavez out, and to make sure that we're not going to create any more problems. Because if we stop that up, it's going to have to go somewhere. And if you're going to build on it, you're going to have to fill it in.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we deny ordinance number 21-07, rezoning the 800 to 900 block of South Washington Street from C2 and R2 to R4, and that the city work with the owner.
Second.
Madam Mayor?
Have a motion to deny. A motion and a second. That has been made. Is there a comment on the motion, David?
Oh, there's a comment about a question of the property, and I was about to make it before the motion was made. Every
I'm
time
sorry,
I
but
started to speak up, someone else spoke up.
But it has been made, and we do have to have the roll call. Roll call.
You don't have discussion after the motion?
Only if, as it applies to the motion.
Okay.
Yes.
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 Ordinance 21-07 is denied. Philip, do you need to read this? No. Thank you. Next is our staff reports. Philip?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You have in your packet the March financials. As always, please feel free to contact myself or Christina, the Finance Director, should you have any questions regarding those. As far as the Administrator's report, I have 3 expenditures to provide or report to you. The first one was in the electric department for $39,980 for a substation protection panel for the Moss substation. In the IT division, $44,999.03 for a core stack replacement for City Hall as it relates to connectivity and security equipment for our networks. And then in the administration building, we recently entered into an agreement for a study on bioeconomic development opportunity zones with a company called EcoStrat, Inc. The Walton Family Foundation provided a 50-50 match for that study. The total cost of the study was $32,650, and half of that, almost half of that, 49.9%, is to be paid from the grant from the Walton Family Foundation. The bioeconomic development zones, that study is to look at our opportunity zone and see if it can be identified as a bioeconomic development opportunity zone, which would then encourage individuals looking to do some sort of bioeconomic or biomass project to potentially invest in that zone. The idea is to try to make our opportunity zone stand out from the thousands of opportunity zones across the nation. As it relates to a comment that Director Hunt mentioned earlier, late last year I had an issue that came before staff regarding an obstruction in the street right-of-way, and in researching the code I found a section in the code that in 86-3 that talked about obstructions to public lands and said very specifically that only the board could approve temporary obstructions to streets, right-of-ways, alleys, parks, sidewalks, etc. And so we began applying that to street closures as it relates to special event permits. However, a couple of weeks ago I had a reason to do more research as it relates to a special event permit and reread section 70-4B, which specifically provides to the staff the right to approve special event permits and sort of describes that as street fairs and other things that it could occur in a street, and staff working with police and fire has the right to approve those special event permits and their associated street closures. So I just wanted to inform the board that that resolution 1621 that you saw tonight would be the last resolution as it relates to street closures for special event permits that would come before the board, and we'll go back to the old way of doing it, which is at the staff level. And speaking of that, back in March, on March 20th, the board approved resolution 1221 authorizing an alleyway closure adjacent to the brick ballroom for JBU's junior and senior banquet on May the 14th. And the original closure was from 5 to 10 p.m. JBU has asked to amend that alleyway closure to start at 3 rather than 5, and we will approve that at the staff level based on my new and improved interpretation of the code, or the reading of the code. It's not really an interpretation. Last Thursday we had our first meeting of our Broadband Advisory Committee. We met here, we discussed the mission, we discussed various examples of business models and service offerings, and we also heard from Mark Latham regarding his experience in Highland, Illinois, and I asked them to start reviewing other documentation, and we'll have another meeting I think next Thursday, again here in this room. And there was a amendment to the membership of the committee, and I'll let Director Allen speak to that during his board reports. And then lastly, you have copies of some information from the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement as it relates to COVID. The daily active numbers per 1,000 population in Benton County has increased from 0.69 in April 22 to 0.82 as of May the 2nd. So while we see much less numbers overall in COVID cases, it's still important that as many people get vaccinated as possible, because we're seeing a slight uptick in those active cases. Benton County, excuse me, I think that's a misprint. Washington County has remained at 0.78 between April 22nd and May the 2nd. And then the daily number of active cases per 1,000 population in Northwest Arkansas has increased from 0.7 on April 22nd and a slight uptick to 0.77 as of May 2nd. And as far as the numbers of individuals in Northwest Arkansas who were 16 plus years of age and are fully vaccinated has increased from 22.6% to 26.6%. So that's a a positive sign on that, and you have examples of those maps and images from that website, which is what we have been following. The last thing I have to report is many of you know we had an employee accident yesterday. It's ironic that today we had some contact from the Arkansas Department of Transportation as it relates to the guardrail, the request for a guardrail. And I don't have anything officially to report, but they are seriously looking at trying to find a way to allow the city to construct a guardrail, at least from the vehicular side of the accidents that we have. I'm not promising anything here tonight, but they're seem as of today to seem to be very open to working with us to find a solution for that. If we find a solution for that, then I have other solutions as it relates to preventing the accident that occurred yesterday. But I'm gonna hold that until we see what the highway department says. So I ask that everybody keep the family of this employee in their prayers, and we hope for as quick and speedy full recovery as possible. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Next will be our director's reports. Tonight, Carol, we'll start with you, please.
Well, my thoughts are with the employee and their family, for his family, for a complete recovery. One of the things that I think is great, that Monday the senior center opened to allow the seniors back in for lunch and for games and different things. So we are slowly coming back to some type of normalcy. As we can see from the rain last week, we do have some drainage problems and we have some work to do. However, it did also show that some of the areas where we were doing drainage work did work. And I think that is a very positive note. The mural on the Simmons building is just, it's fantastic. It's awesome. And the artist did a wonderful job. I want to congratulate to all the graduating seniors, whether it's JBU or the high school, and kudos to the Chamber for a great Dogwood Festival. It was just, everybody was having a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Lisa?
My family's praying for that employee too. Is it okay to say that a fund has been set up for the individual and it is a grand savings bank? Do we just go by and drop it off, or do we give it to somebody at the city?
And I'll read you the
Okay.
email that I received today, if you give me.
Okay, I'll go ahead while you're looking that up. So a lot of times when we do our director's report, it's based off of things that we get calls on a lot. And I had a call from a citizen, and I want citizens to know that the police department has all the data online. So if you're going to buy a house and you want to know if it's a good neighborhood or if you have good neighbors or what's going on, look at that crime data, and that's going to give you good information on if you should buy in that neighborhood or not. And another thing that I've received lots of people stopping me at different restaurants and texting me was on the solar. And I want to take this opportunity to remind citizens how the buy all, sell all on solar works since we adopted the policy last year. I personally appreciate the benefits of solar. If you can afford it, that's great. My family and I try to do our part in being eco-friendly. I am, as I think most of us on the board are, for solar. I just want to make sure it is clear how it works when you utilize solar panels as an electric customer. For new solar customers that are not grandfathered in and are on city utilities, the city purchases what you produce at the same cost we pay for electricity from GRDA. No less, no more. We do not just purchase your excess only like we used to. We purchase all of it that you produce. So for example, whatever amount of electricity you produce, the city buys it from you at the current rate. For this example, we'll say 2 cents. When you buy back that electricity, you purchase it at the same rate as every other customer in the city with or without solar. For example, we'll say 9 cents. So you will sell your electric to the city at 2 cents and purchase it at 9 cents. I want to make sure citizens understand how this process works. I have been approached regarding this subject on multiple occasions and want to make sure I'm doing my part on representing as a representative of the citizens to educate customers. And then the last thing I want to say is I want to thank the city staff for all they did during the flooding. I know they got a lot of criticism, but we are not the only city that experienced flooding. And I don't say this because we don't have drainage issues, because we do, but the staff went above and beyond to deal with the issues at hand with the resources they had available, and I appreciate everything they do for the citizens.
You have that information.
Yes, so we set up an account at Grand Savings Bank. It's located at 1660 Highway 412 West, and the account is in the name of the City of Siloam Employee Club account, and anyone who wishes to donate to help this employee as he recovers from his injuries, you can go there and provide donate money in the name of that account. Again, City of Siloam Employee Club account.
Much of what I was going to say has already been said. Thoughts and prayers to the employee and his family, and congratulations to upcoming graduates. Congratulations to the Chamber for a job well done with the Dogwood Festival. I know people, I think I saw more excitement about it this year than ever before, because they have been waiting for so long for it, and it seemed they got what they wanted. We're still eating on the kettle corn that we bought at the Dogwood Festival, enjoying that. Anyway, not a whole lot else to say. You all have covered it well. Thank you.
Regarding the broadband committee, I frankly at the time did not understand why 2 could not be on it, and then once I did understand it, I felt my background with it would help, and then the more I thought about it afterwards, I realized that I'm not an IT professional like Lisa is, and I simply follow the industry. And I did not want any baggage of me supporting it in 2012 to affect the project going forward. So I asked first the mayor and then asked Philip if it was all right for me to step back and let Lisa go ahead and take my spot. And they thought that it was fine, as long as the board thought it was fine. And neither of them thought anybody would care because of the comments that were made in the meeting. So that's where my reasoning came from. I want to congratulate Arthur and the Chamber of Commerce Board and the staff. Probably best Dogwood Festival I've seen in a long, long time. And not just the pent-up demand, but I think you had a lot of booths, people who have, out of necessity, without a job during COVID last summer, they have thought, what can I do to sell? And they've made things. And it's been pretty unique to see that add to our festival and get it back to an arts and craft. But it's the food, man. That's you guys got a great variety, and that's what I always go down for, and I loved it, and I thought you guys did a great job. And the music, especially right there. I don't like to close streets, but that was a perfect location where you guys had it. And so I appreciate everything the Chamber did this year. I'm still, my heart is really for this gentleman who got hurt mowing around the ponds. I'm still very frustrated. We're still seeing the ramifications of not having any guardrails around the entry pond. I was not on the board when these were approved and built, and most of us were not around staff or board. But rails should have been considered, in my opinion, just because what I've seen over the years, my worry was the risk of children falling in, because it's quite a fall down to the water. It's not just like the water's a foot down, it's quite a bit. So I've always felt rails should have been put all the way around all of them. And I really want us to consider doing that as soon as possible, simply because the previous project we learned tonight, you know, it was approved in 2019 and took 2 years for RDOT to review it and approve it. And even though we're asking this a second time, I just don't want there to be a long delay on the state's part, and I want us to get this done. I think the safety of our citizens is always the number one priority of any government, and I think we need to put that as a priority and not let it be on hold anymore. I would like us to consider, Philip, I meant to bring this up to you, the leftover pieces, I call them pieces, they look bad on the streets, like what is in front of the old Art Center church, the pieces that were put on Carl Street just north of Tulsa. They look bad, they're not doing any function, and they can create a driving hazard. I thought that something was going to be done with these, and it seems like they've just been left and laying there, and some of them are torn up and they just look bad. And I'd like us to consider removing them.
You help me understand what, I'm not
The
following
biking
you.
things that were installed years ago, there's pieces that are still there. Part of it was removed, but part of it are still there. I'm talking about in front of the Art Center, there's that thing is dangerous where a sign has been put out in the middle of the street.
So
and there's,
we'll bring that back to the board.
there's
because
still pieces on, and
if the board wishes to consider that, that's a board decision, because the board decided to leave those there on Maxwell and on Carl.
I thought that they had a time limit that they were gonna be, looked at, and,
Director Allen, they did have a time limit, but when it was decided to remove them all, the board decided, I believe, to leave those there.
okay.
So that would be an issue for the board to take
If
up.
they're gonna stay, can we fix them? Because some of them look run down, run over, beat up. I'm just saying they look bad.
Okay.
But I would like us to consider getting rid of them. I don't see how they serve any purpose any further. And then regarding our rate study tonight, I'll just say I expected more than what we received in terms of the cities that were given to us. For what we're paying this firm, I thought to simply use public information from the largest cities along the corridor, I just expected more. I thought there would be, well, you hired a consulting firm to do their specialty, and I felt they should have interviewed the other city staff. They should have found out what's gone on, what's projected, what's planned, and just to kind of rehash what could be Googled. I mean, we could have had someone do that if we paid them as a city employee, because I didn't feel like we got anything that we couldn't have found ourselves. And I would like to see more of what was brought up by this board of looking at comparable cities, comparable electric companies, the co-ops and the other things that were presented from these cities along the corridor, they don't apply. So I was disappointed in that. And lastly, I just want to say, may the 4th be with you. Thank you.
Marla.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to really thank the lady that came and prayed for us. I thought that was very thoughtful. It made me feel good. And anytime we can interject that within ourselves, we can't help but do and look at what we should be guided to do. And so I felt really blessed tonight from that being done. I also want to thank the employee that was with the gentleman that got injured on the mower for having the mind to start medical attention and to get things done, because you know, that's an important part of it too, and that's probably very stressful for who that was as well. And so our prayers should go to their family as well as the employee that was injured. And I appreciate staff listening to the citizen concerns that I brought up tonight. I know sometimes it's hard to make everybody happy, but I just feel like anytime we listen, we're doing our part, and if we can share that and bring it to public view, that, you know, we're doing what the citizens need us to do. And so with that, I have to say that I had a citizen contact me who is a property owner asking why the tattoo parlors are zoned industrial, and would like for staff to look into addressing the reasoning behind that classification, and if that could be changed for a property to become a tattoo parlor, and how that process would work. And I have to shout out to the Manna Center. We gave out over 200,000 pounds of food last month. So we are pushing the million before we get to June and July. So with that, I just say, God bless everybody.
Thank you, Marla. Reed?
Thoughts and our prayers go to the employee that was injured. I certainly appreciate the communication that was given as a director, but also what was communicated in that at the fire department, police department, and we had good response. And I know this won't bring complete health back to this individual, but I appreciate how the city's response to this was. I do know we've had a lot of rain, a lot of drainage. I'm personally pleased at the improvement that we're seeing in our drainage, and that we're not just going to sit right where we are, but we're going to continue to improve drainage within the community. And I'm glad for that. We have a plan of action with that even. Congratulations for on the Dogwood Festival. I've heard only good things, so I'm glad to hear that. I want to lift up our graduates as we celebrate the culmination of high school and university, and that these youngins get to go out and spread their wings a little bit, and they can take over any time. Just give me a place to sit down and drink my sweet tea. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Reed. Brad?
Thoughts and prayers to city employee. That road is going to be a very long road, and I hope the months to come we keep that in mind. I had the privilege to, or the honor, or the pain for some to ride the square to square from Fayetteville to Bentonville. I see the benefits in connectivity, economically, and quality of life. They were also impacted by water, and their street departments and their city employees did exactly what ours did. They stepped up, they got things ready, and they tried to make stuff as much as normal as you could under those circumstances. And obviously the work is ongoing, but we were impacted, and so were our other cities in our area. With broadband in mind, I appreciate Director Allen's comments and his honesty. But I was reading an article on Zoom states, and what really made me excited is the potential that we have in Siloam for that. So this remote working concept that's really taking hold. I know specifically in the historical district, I've got some young entrepreneurs that are converting older homes into Airbnbs for longer stays. I know people that visit JBU. It's generational. I'm not one of them, but there's many generational families. My son-in-law is one of them, where their family comes back and they're looking for lodging that is more home-based for longer stays, because Northwest Arkansas is that epic. I mean, we're just, that's the way it is. So I just ask for the city to work with these folks. A lot of lot lines in the historical districts were done in the 1800s, and obviously time has changed. So it requires us to work together, and this really just increases the quality of life. And as a former city employee that lives in the historical district, that's one of the things I value the most. Maybe as you get older, you value quality of life more. I don't know, but that's how it rolls for me. And the Dogwood Festival, I don't know how you could describe the joy that we received at the Dogwood Festival that was much needed in the community. I was there every day, and I visited everything I could, and I didn't partake in a lot of calorie intake, but I enjoyed the activities. And I will say the addition of the car show, man, that was just that was a fantastic, fun car show, and just the way it all flowed together. And the Dogwood made it this year for the most part. And the Dogwood and Redbud this year, and board members have said it here, and everybody in the community, I think this is probably the most vivid we've ever seen them. In my lifespan in the city of Siloam, 30 plus years, I just can't recall them being that vivid. And it was just fantastic. And so that's kind of, I also want to remember the volunteers, and I know Chamber President Arthur would agree, without volunteers, it just ain't going to happen. So some fantastic volunteers down there. But the dogwoods and the redbuds and some tree removal that we have going on right now leads me to just encourage us once again, and I'm going to submit this to the city director. And this has been brought up numerous times, but becoming a tree city. It's not that difficult. The city administrator was up at the tree giveaway. We were going to get 3 trees. We only got 1 tree. And that line was longer than any food vendor at the Dogwood Festival. It went through the parking lot, over the library. I thought we were going to have to get a flag guy out, and people were denied trees. And I think we're there. I think it's time for us to do that. It's a simple step. Folks around us have done it. And I know JBU was a catalyst behind it. When Director Beers was on the board, he had brought this up before, and I think it's time. So I'm excited about that. And with that, I'll say, may the forest be with you. And I'd ask that we make a motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? We have a motion and a second. Burns and Hunt. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.